What is the saddest downfall ever? Aurelian, emperor of Rome 270–275, ended a three-way civil war, fought back a Germanic invasion, put down waves of usurpers and opportunistic revolts, practically ended a decades-long military anarchy. He was hailed as Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. To wield a crumbling empire so steeped in decadence required a strong will. To rule it well required something else entirely. He was a strict disciplinarian and had a reputation for it. In 275, a particularly bumbly officer cocked up at his job and profited from it. Fearing punishment, he assassinated Aurelian, and the crisis of the 3rd century was back on. Watching my old best friend from my teenage years lose his mind due to schizophrenia, it was so sad. He was a very talented artist and had great potential. He started hearing voices and seeing things. He thought his parents were trying to poison him, thought he was God. There was no way to reason with him. The person he was basically died, and now he is a completely different person. He became homeless and refuses to take his meds. Ouch. As a bipolar person who has had 2 manic episodes in the past, I can relate to this. The last one was 12 years ago and life is great, better on medication, but I was really fucked up for 9 months. Everyone wrote me off. I left my family and shacked up with a near stranger. Just off the wall. Crazy bad life decisions that almost ended my life. I hope your friend can get some help. Life does get better when your neurons are firing correctly and your hormones are in balance. Same thing happening with a friend of mine from high school. Not so much vulgar, but blacks out every night, and after a drink or two is just like talking to someone with severe Alzheimer's. Constantly sneaking shots when I'm around him. Ghosts me for years now whenever I'm in town. Used to be great friends, but now not so much. It's depressing. But a good friend go down this road. Saddest part is he had an older brother who was a heroin addict. So from a young age the guy witnessed addiction firsthand and witnessed how fucked up it was for everyone around him. Yet he still thinks it's all fun and games because he has a girlfriend who is just as fucked up as him. New group of friends he met through his girlfriend, and a job, working at a call center for a payday loan company. Yeah, basically lost all his childhood and college friends. We tried to continue being friends with him, but I think I was the last to stop contact after one too many 12 p.m. calls during the pandemic when he was slurring his words and you could hear his girlfriend and friends in the background arguing over who owes who for the coke the night before. It's hard. He was a smart guy, good student, driven to some extent, but he always wanted something more and always had a bit of a drive towards the extreme. As much as we all told him that this was not sustainable, he didn't admit it. Honestly, I think the alcohol helped him deal with his depressive tendencies and the group setting, where everyone was fucked up. With his social anxiety, hard to be anxious when everyone is making a fool of themselves. He is 27 now, and even if he should know, he just doesn't realize where this path leads. I remember the last time we spoke I told him straight up he needed to seek treatment, and he was so sure he wasn't addicted. I was just like, well, when was the last time you went 24 hours without alcohol? He couldn't answer, probably because it had been over a year. Worst part was that I felt like I couldn't say anything because in the past I wasn't a saint. Any drug he has done, I've probably done, and in my younger 20s I definitely drank more than I should. There was a time he was the one telling me to knock it off. The difference was it was always an occasional thing for me. I did some coke a couple times separated by months when another buddy of mine got some and gave me a line or two. I tripped on acid every couple months for a year. Honestly, the only experience I would do again, or I drank way too much at some birthday party or Super Bowl party every now or then. So I always let others be the ones to chide him, as I saw it. Hell, a mutual friend who he knew since they were babies even asked me to befriend this new group of friends and go to some of their parties to try and help him, and I did, but ultimately we were just fighting a force that did not want to change. At least one of the saddest to me is General Grant. He was one of the few presidents that would live up to our modern standards of views on race, and eventually went from the most popular man in America to becoming a pariah largely for sticking with Reconstruction and equality for freed slaves long after it became unpopular. He also was genuinely trusting of people, which led to scandals in his cabinet and him being swindled out of all his money. His reputation suffered long-term damage and never fully recovered. Bret Hart, in the 90s one of the biggest, most popular and talented wrestlers in the world. Then in 1997, after telling WWF he was leaving the company, he gets publicly humiliated in his home country, leaves for the rival company WCW, where he received nowhere near the acclaim he once had. In 1999 his younger brother dies in a tragic accident. In 2000 he receives a concussion which led to post-concussion syndrome, headaches, loss of memory and his retirement. The following years for Bret featured him divorcing his wife, losing both his parents and having a stroke and cancer. Watch any interview of him and he comes across as very tired and numb compared to the passionate performer he once was. Ellen DeGeneres used to think she's kinda cool and harmless. Oh boy, did that turn out to be wrong. Mildly cool, kinda interesting for the time, and turned out to be an abusive controlling freak who manipulated people on pain of being fired or blacklisted, and used the workplace as a sexual supermarket for herself and her producers. Turns out that bubbly cute gay people can be just as shitty and creepy as straight people. At the end of the day they're still just shitty creepy people. Amy Winehouse, 2 albums. Dad who left her but then wants to squeeze as much money put of her as he can. Boyfriend who introduces her to class of drugs. Media mocking her constantly and following her around when she didn't want to be famous. A severe alcohol problem and bulimia problem from her teens. Dead as 27 after a nearly 7-year career. 3 where she was doing what she loved and was completely out of the spotlight. RIP legend, she died nearly 10 years ago. It wasn't his depression per se that got to him, it was his diagnosis of Lewy body dementia that put him over the edge. To find out that you have a progressive disease which is already starting to affect you, and knowing that you'll be losing bits and pieces of yourself until you're nothing but a husk, when not only your career but your whole identity is built on your intelligence and quick wit. I can't say I wouldn't do something similar in his position. I hope to God I never have to deal with that. Depression sucked. But he could deal with that. Finding out your brain is basically rotting away while you're depressed, or even if you're not depressed, it's still horrible to think about. Knowing that you're slowly losing everything that makes you you, and there's not a damn thing anyone can do about it. I'd also argue that he never really fell. He had career ups and downs, but he was still working and very much loved by the public, which is everyone was so shocked when he died, and how it happened a few people on the inside knew. But it sounds as if he was keeping the diagnosis fairly quiet as long as he could, so most people had no idea what he was dealing with until he died. I understand why he did it, but I have to admit his passing really hit me hard. My best friend of 25 years losing his mind after a long fight with liver failure. We were inseparable since we met in 3rd grade. He was the absolute coolest dude in high school and the glue of our friend group. We shared more incredible memories that I can possibly share here, and within 8 months of having liver problems he became an absolute shell of his former self. Withdrawn, angry, stalled out, not willing to get help, victimized and his own worst enemy. He's refused to put himself on a transplant list for almost 7 years now out of pride and the belief he can cure himself with holistic medicine. Instead of ever getting better, he's a complete burnout who will only call or email random friends every few years to blame us for things that happened in high school 15 years ago. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see someone who helped me become who I am, be 100% done moving forward in life and incapable of escaping themselves. It's truly changed how I approach my life and my goals. You don't get do-overs and nothing is guaranteed. Go live your lives to the fullest, my friends. He would have had some sort of breakdown, but taking LSD every day and being locked in the closet brought out his anxiety about performing and the pressure of writing and being the frontman for Pink Floyd. and brought out mental illness. The one thing people forget is the rest of the band threw him under the bus. They did bring in David Gilmour to be the fifth member and to have Gilmour perform Sid's role live, but Sid was sick. He was unable to show up to the studio, and would often play practical jokes on them. They didn't tell him he was fired, and Roger Waters told them all to not bother picking him up. He found out when he showed up at the studio. I will give them credit that they helped Sid get his career back on track and put out 2 solo albums, especially since according to his former girlfriend he actually got better around 1969, but he had a few breakdowns in 1970, and after his new band got a bad review in the paper, he quit music for good. How he spent his life until he passed away in 2006 is totally not like how people think. He lived at his mother's house, would do DIY and painting projects, where he would paint each wall a different color, replace doorknobs with animal shapes, and paint things, take a picture, then burn it in a bonfire. He would go to his neighborhood pub where he was a regular, had a local grocery store people always saw him at, and he was always seen riding his bike. In a weird way, he found happiness. It's just the numerous breakdowns meant he was retired from being Sid. He was just Roger Barrett. Charlie Sheen's downfall is sad to think about, but he did it to himself. Went from one of, if not the most, highest-paid actors starring in one of America's most popular shows to talking about Tiger Blood and having a string of allegations against him. He's basically a real-life version of his 2.5 Men character. You can also see how poorly he's aged. In Season 8 of 2.5 Men, he already looks older and more tired. Fast forward a couple of years later, and he's turned into a living, breathing corpse. My favorite Val story is how he ended up in the series finale of Psych. This show has basically made jokes about loving Val Kilmer movies for like 7 years. They also have had a character that is mentioned every episode but never actually seen. Want to make an appearance as that guy? He had never heard of the show, but did it, and one of the best payoffs for a long-running joke in a show. The retail stores Sears and Kmart. Some of you may not remember a time when Sears was the place to go for everything. They even had giant electronics departments with Nintendos, Atari, and you could play them on special demo units. Everything you could want in one store. Now there's only a few of these stores left in the USA. They could have been big but they just went in the wrong direction. We had a Kmart here and it was the saddest retail store ever. Nothing was ever updated. Old merchandise, dirty, expired food, you name it. It finally closed a couple of years ago. Sears over here at least was actually a decent retail store. The ones here were clean and had decent merchandise. After a while though the merchandise just stopped coming in. They were selling winter clothing in summer, and they just closed up. The death of the American shopping mall. For the most part except for a few exceptions, the shopping mall is dead. In my area we have so many dead malls I can't even name them all. I went to one last weekend, not realizing how dead it actually was, and oh man, it was an experience in itself. I kind of forgot what a dead mall was like, and this mall I went to was indeed quite dead. I've watched once bustling malls go down like rockets. The thing is I spent most of my time as a teen and college student in malls and it was always a joy. In the smaller local malls we created a lot of harmless shenanigans. Unfortunately these are the type of mall that is the most dead here now and well, mostly gone. There were a ton of people around and it was always crowded. It was always nice going to a mall because we have such a long winter here and nothing to do during that time if you don't want to be outside. Don't know about ever, but what happened to the original Fleetwood Mac is pretty tragic. Way back in the day, back when they were a blues band fronted by Peter Green, they had a completely different vibe. Peter Green was a fantastic blues guitarist, and their other guitarist Danny Kirwan could keep right up with him. Even though he was far younger, they had a good thing going for a while, until Peter Green started showing signs of mental illness. At his lowest, he wasn't bathing or changing his clothes for days at a time. He forgot where he was and who other people were, even if he had known them for years. He eventually left the band, which forced them to cancel all touring for a while. The infamous Munich LSD party incident might have had something to do with Green's sudden decline in mental state, though we may never know for certain. If you consider yourself a rock historian or know someone else who is into that sort of thing, you might already know this story. To summarize, the band was touring in Germany, and right as they got off their plane, a fancy car pulled up, a beautiful woman stepped out, and before any of the crew knew what had happened, Peter Green and Danny Kirwan were both gone. With both their guitarists, Mia, the band couldn't possibly perform, but luckily the roadies were following the car. Eventually they pulled up to a huge estate, practically a castle. Very old money. Everyone there was tripping, and they couldn't get Green to leave. By the time they finally got Peter Green back into the car, the roadies noticed that he was starting to pass out, and was incoherent. No one knows what he took that day or how much, but one thing is clear: Peter Green was never the same mentally after that point. Not completely. The band had their guitarists back, but had to cancel the tour anyway. Shortly after, Peter Green left the band, and Danny Kirwan stepped in as front man, but then a short time later, Kirwan also began to suffer from mental problems, dangerous mood swings, and deep depression. Though he was a talented musician, he eventually left the band as well after his behavior became too much for the other band members. He would become extremely paranoid and defensive over some small argument or minor problem they were having with a song. He also suffered from alcoholism and drug addiction. Some have speculated that he was self-medicating for bipolar disorder. By the early 90s, he was homeless in London, sleeping on park benches. By 2000, he was living in a care home for alcoholics in South London, and that's where he remained until he died. In 2018, he never performed publicly again. Following Danny Kirwan's exit, Fleetwood Mac was again directionless, until Bob Welch, their third guitarist, took over as writer and lead singer. The Bob Welch era is criminally snubbed and overshadowed by what came directly after a few pretty good but commercially disappointing albums later. The band ousted Welch and brought in Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and with this new lineup, they recorded Rumours, which became one of the best-selling albums of all time. There is a guy who I work with. When I started out, was a model employee, showed up early, did his work, was a great person to go to for help or a question, and was just an all-around great guy. Then COVID hit, he was locked in. When we came back, his cousin died and left 2 kids behind for him to help raise, all while living hundreds of miles away. He went off the deep end, making mistakes, showing up late to work, getting angrier and angrier, eventually getting diagnosed with depression and I think OCD, and is on medication. He's making a recovery, but our boss and most of the team just doesn't view him the same, which may contribute to the problem. I think he's trying to find a new job, so I hope he can find something and heal. Jared Fogle, the old lost hundreds of pounds eating Subway spokesman. He was just an average person out of nowhere, not a celebrity, etc., and he really did inspire a ton of people, and his own weight loss was so successful. The person behind the spokesman image though was a sicko, and the company knew about it for years. It tangled up a great weight loss, keep it off success story with a child molester. Another example is Bill Cosby, great comedian, Hollywood, family man success story and role model, and it turns out he was a creepy sexual predator behind the scenes. They were both such a great role model and inspiration in the media, and then the floor dropped out from under all of us when all the behind the scenes shit finally came out. It taints everything. You can't tell people now that you were inspired by Fogle or Cosby for your drive, success, etc., because the only thing they zero in on is the sick crimes, scandals. People just can't seem to separate the two things. The inspirational from the OMG. I think, in all honesty, that's the real sad part, not just concerning those two people but anyone who has managed to inspire others and then they fall from grace. Sure, they have it coming, the justice and punishment I mean in these two cases, but in a way they manage to take the rest of us with them in some way, shape or form. Conservatism. I mean, it was all more or less a scam to make wealthy people even wealthier, but it at least used to have some principles, family values, fiscal responsibility, free trade, etc. In the last few years it became nothing more than a hysterical, science-hating conspiracy theory doomsday cult that wants to destroy everything good because it thinks everything that doesn't come from Trump is a Trojan horse for some kind of Satan-worshipping, pedophilic communist cabal. Watching family members and friends just waste away in front of Tucker Carlson and turn into hateful, conspiracy-obsessed shells of their former selves who say the most disgusting, outrageous things, is very, very sad. Gotta say, my younger cousin, when he graduated from high school, he was a good kid, got good grades, had a lot of friends but wasn't an out-of-control drinker or partier. He was the only one of our cousins who was nice to my sisters, was always willing to be interested in whatever you were interested in, went to college to study physics, seemed like he had a promising future. When he went away to college, he started doing drugs and hanging out with the weird crowd, and it really seemed to mess him up. I saw him 2 years later and all his sharpness and curiosity about things was gone. He ended up barely graduating with a degree in philosophy and became a self-proclaimed anarchist who posted lengthy obscure Facebook rants. Last I heard, he was working at Home Depot.